We conducted a study on capital raising of Russian companies and trading on their stocks. We also found that the majority of trading takes place overseas, particularly in London. This situation is similar to Brazil in the 1990s, where most of the trading in Brazilian companies took place in New York. In this case, the Brazilian exchange Bovespa introduced higher listing standards to protect minority investors, and after 10 years, its capital market was finally repatriated. Like Brazil, Russia has an opportunity to repatriate its capital markets as the integrated MICEX RTS gains global recognition as a marketplace which protects minority investors. The largest Russian companies listed DRs on the LSE to raise capital as investors demanded the protection of their minority rights. There are currently 47 Russian DRs listed on the LSE, representing a total of 79% of Russian market capitalization. These LSE DRs end up poaching most of the trading in Russian stocks away from Moscow Exchange. Looking at the example of Gazprom, we see in the graph below that Gazprom currently trades 60% in LSE compared to 40% in 2007. Moreover, Sberbank listed its DR 16 months ago, and London has already captured 46% of market share. Similarly, Brazilian equities also used to trade mostly overseas. However, this trend was later reversed. Minority investors in Brazil during the 1990s enjoyed the lowest level of protection among most other capital markets. A study by Dyke and Zingales on shareholder rights found that private benefits of control comprised 65% of the firm equity value in Brazil. An example of minority rights abuse was the merger between Ambev and Interbrew, where ordinary shares soared while preference shares dropped by 30%. As a result, investors lost trust, and this raised the cost of capital to Brazilian companies, which prompted them to list ADRs in order to signal to investors their commitment to protect minority shareholders' rights. Between 1995 to 1999, Brazilian companies raised a total of $32 billion in ADRs compared to $550 million in domestic equity offerings. The Novo Mercado initiative introduced higher corporate governance requirements to protect minority investors by essentially prohibiting preference shares. It then took more than 10 years to start the repatriation process. As Novo Mercado became the standard for new Brazilian companies seeking to go public, many Brazilian companies opted to list in Bovespa instead of tapping the US market, kicking off the repatriation trend. Foreign investors started to become more comfortable with directly accessing the Brazilian capital markets instead of via ADRs. The graph below shows the steady growth in the proportion of foreign investors in Bovespa CBLC assets under custody. Currently, Russian companies are raising more capital at the LSE than in domestic equity offerings. The Russian privatization plan provides the opportunity to repatriate capital raising and DR trading back to Moscow Exchange. Trading in European stocks was repatriated from US ADRs to their domestic markets. For example, Nokia used to trade 60% in the US versus 20% currently. European ADRs also became obsolete after domestic exchanges demutualized and gained global recognition. Ultimately, companies ended up delisting their ADRs. In the same way, Moscow Exchange could regain trading in Russian stocks and companies would delist their DRs.